Hello, and welcome back to the Obojima Podcast. My name is Jeremiah, and I am with Ari and Adam. We are the writers for Obojima. You tune in every week to watch us do our weekly writers meeting where we discuss random stuff. Get off me, Cable. We discuss random stuff and mostly write about the book. In this week's episode, we are going to talk about the sword schools. Which we've talked about quite a bit, and I don't think we've done an episode about sword schools prior to this, right?
No, not a dedicated one.
Okay, cool.
And it's about time we did.
Because
swords.
So, because you like swords, we all do. I mean, who doesn't? And so this week we're talking about swords and the schools that they stay in.
There are no swords outside of schools in Obojima.
Yeah, so the sword schools, which, if you're familiar with our feats, or I don't think they've seen the faction section, but our backgrounds, I believe we've released some of the backgrounds as well. You can see that you can be a sword school acolyte or learn some feats from some of these schools, each one with a named master cut or master strike. And so let's jump into it. What are these sword schools? Ari, the sword school master, the master himself.
Oh goodness,
the maestro, as they say.
I won't put you right on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where we have four schools. We ended up with 4 schools that are kind of sprinkled throughout the island, and you can, if you prove that you are would be a worthy student. You are given an invitation to go to one of these schools and train, and you can spend an amount of time there. And once you are there and you show that you have mastered, what the sword masters have taught you, you can challenge them, and in a ritual kind of duel where you have to score a touch with a
like
sword.
Fencing.
Yeah, like fencing rules almost. Yeah, you're not actually trying to kill the masters.
Yeah.
Then they will teach you kind of the secret of their school, which is one of these feats.
Yeah.
And there are 4 schools. Each school has 2 masters, and that's kind of a tradition on the island. So that when they're showing techniques, that they are basically 2 people of equal rank that are able to kind of demonstrate these skills. And then part of the enjoyment of having these in the game is that. In order to get the invitation to go to one of these sword schools, there are kind of these like designated, almost like deputized champions that you can find throughout the island.
Other people that have trained at the school and either learned the technique or were given like a minor master title, essentially, whether they're respected members of this school.
Yeah, and you can challenge them, or they can invite you to another one of these little duels. And if you show that you've got the stuff, kid, then they'll give you a token, an invitation. And you can present that at one of the schools, and then you can train there.
Yeah, and we've mechanically built in, this is kind of, I think the sword schools are a really good embodiment of this kind of style of game design that we've been doing, where we're trying to mix mechanics in with a role-playing element. So it's not just like I think another good example of this is the companion spirits. Which we originally marked as familiars because when I was writing this stuff, I didn't really understand where this was going to go. But we've shifted a lot of these mechanics, or created a lot of mechanics, that in order to unlock a mechanical feature, there first requires roleplay elements and story development elements for your character to grow.
Yeah.
And so, it's very interesting.
Yeah, we call it like narrative unlocks, right? You do a thing, and then you're rewarded for doing cool, flavorful, kind of story, like getting involved in stories, and then you get the reward that's a mechanical reward. And for me as a player, one of the things that I always look for, and I've probably said it on this podcast probably numerous times,
is dwarfs.
Yeah, well, also that. Let's talk about that later. But one of my favorite things is when things that I have, obviously, like magic items do this really well, where you can remember where you got that item, right?
Yeah.
But other mechanics don't really tell that story of where your character has come from.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things I look for. One of the things I loved about this idea of sword schools is you might have a completionist player who wants to go to all of them, right? And that's really cool. Now they are like the sword master of sword masters. Like that's awesome. What a cool story to tell about them about themselves.
And certainly the only one on the island.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then, but the idea of just having that as a design space of, there's always the weird kind of a weirdness that we accept as part of the convention of playing role-playing games, is that, okay, I'm at this level, and then I have gotten enough experience or I've gone through the milestones to level up, and then just I now know these things, how to do these things.
You instantly overnight wake up and
I just figured it out.
Trigonometry, finally.
And I know I've
been waiting for this DLC patch.
I've had, we've had conversations with people where, they say, well, it's the idea that you've been training throughout that level.
Yeah.
Sure. But as a player, I haven't been thinking about it. It hasn't been front of mind in any way. Yeah. Okay. So it's been kind of happening under the hood in some way. It's out of sight. So I don't feel like it's something that has progressed.
Yeah.
When I unlock it. So that's sometimes where like the game and the narrative is like, oh yeah, this is also a game. And so having these narrative unlocks are like a fun way, at least in my mind, just a fun way to reward play, to reward the storytelling aspect of it with mechanics.
I think I'm, of all the things we're doing in Obojima, we're doing a lot of cool stuff. I really love how the interaction with roleplay and mechanics line up with Sword School. So to dive into the mechanic side of things, I think it's very interesting. But we talk about this to touch kind of duel that you have to do with the masters. And not only do you have to get an invitation from someone, you have to join the school. You have other apprentices that you're dealing with. There's a lot of role playing to go along. They might send you out on like a challenge or a mission. They do a lot of charitable like acts, and so it could be like pulling onions at a farm, and it could be like scaring off a howler, that took over a barn or something like that. So it stretches from different things. Could be a year-long adventure. It could be a week or a day. But one of the things that you do is, as you experience and you grow and you learn and you participate at these sword schools, each week that you spend there, you kind of you start to take down or you start to learn skills. And the way we reflect that mechanically is by giving the masters a to hit AC that's astronomically high, really, really high, especially for a low level character, like a 30 or something like that. And every week that you spend there, all the time that you train starts to reduce the AC of the master. So if I spent 8 weeks training at this sword school, the master's AC goes down by 8. So now it's a 22, which is still pretty darn challenging to hit for a level 3 sword, fighter or something like that. But it's not impossible. And so the more and more you train, the lower it gets, until eventually it's just a given that you would hit this person because you are as skilled as they are. And I think that's a really fun mechanical way of dealing with it. And obviously DMs can stretch that. So it can be a month of training.
Right.
It could be, you can switch the time. We chose a week, but you can alter and change it as much as you like.
You could alter how much time, how much you want to drop the AC with each of these increments of time.
Yeah.
So there's knobs you can play with just in your own campaign.
And then even like narratively, like when your ACs are similar to the master, like let's say you're both kind of hovering around 18. Mm-hmm. It's like now it's to the touch, right? So there's still, they could hit you, like the DM could roll for the master and be like 20, gotcha. It's like, doesn't matter. So you still don't auto win.
Yeah.
It's like, it's still, then it becomes a combat, So it does push that level. Like you have to really train a long time. And I think that's cool because you could have a fighter that trains at the school, tries to hit the master is like, within 2 shots, it's got you and you're out. And then you go on an adventure and you go do stuff. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to go back to the school.
Try it again.
I'm going to try it again. It's like, okay, the master's AC now is down a little bit more. But when you finally do accomplish it, it's going to be a moment. Like a player is going to really feel good being like, finally, I did that school. And then you go to the next school. And I think like, don't these like schools, they all have like kind of different flavors, right? Like, one is more sort of a finesse, and like another one is more sort of kind of.
That's what we have to hash out. What is that? What is the difference between that? Like we know that we want to do that because each of these schools you could learn you get either a feat, or maybe you can learn to get to forge a certain kind of item, a sword, and then and so presumably that means that their technique, their philosophies are a little bit different, and so that's the thing we have to hash that out. We can talk about the 4 schools, like what their names are and where they're found, and then we can kind of dig into all of them.
I'm pulling up because I know you have the stuff about the schools. I'm going to pull up the feats. And so
great.
We can kind of discuss those in tandem.
Mix and match.
Mix and match. Yeah, let's because I also know, really quick before we move on, you were saying something which I thought was really interesting, and a mechanic that I hadn't really discussed. But one of these schools, based off of the feat, is going to be significantly harder to win to touch than the others, because the feat allows you to take initiative before everyone else. Like you take a reactionary initiative. So this master will always, because you don't have the feat yet, will always act before you, which is super interesting.
That's great.
And so that means even for you to beat them, you have to deflect their first strike before you can even make your own, which is so cool and thematic.
That's awesome.
Very, very interesting. It's almost like the final boss of masters.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm pulling up the playtest material here.
I wonder, like, if in these contests, are there things like you're not allowed to use magic, or are you allowed to use a potion? I
think I can't remember. We might have said that it's frowned upon to use magic.
Yeah, we talked about that because it's supposed to be about the skill. But let me read our previous writing real quick. And
yeah, okay, I've got the feats up here too. We can also look at the apprentice background as well.
Okay, so the pupil must land a hit on the master in 3 rounds without the use of magic.
Oh, there you go. Ooh, none of this tricky nonsense.
Purist. It's a purist art here.
It's about the skill.
We've all played a game. We've all played like a fighting pit in D&D, and all of a sudden, the cleric and bard are on the outside casting guidance and secretly casting magic, and none of that. It's an open room.
And you can always try.
Yeah, right? You've got to turn in your gun and badge when you're in here.
That's right.
I'm all for shenanigans. Shenanigans away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you can get away with it, but then that's also,
you'd think that the master is prepared for that kind of stuff.
The master's prepared.
Yeah,
but
exact consequences are the best part of D&D.
Yeah, exactly.
Do all the things.
Try it.
I love it. So yeah, let's hear about. So let's talk about, I guess, starting with the school names.
Yeah. So there are the 4 school names, and they're named after the 2 masters that are the resident masters. So in the big city, Yadaman in the south, in the Gift of Shiratashi region, the main school there is, or the school there is Candon and Moon. So Candon and Moon's, they preside over the largest city. What do you get from them?
So Candon and Moon, you get, so when accepting the feat, or when finally earning the feat, your walking speed increases by 5 feet. And then this is the extra hard one. So there, immediately after rolling initiative, you can use your reaction before the first turn of combat to draw a weapon and move half your speed. If you end the movement within reach of another creature, you can use the weapon to make a melee attack against that creature.
Ooh.
So you get like a little sprint dash right at the beginning of combat, which, assuming it's all close combat, it's very, that's very interesting. And then there's the one last thing. There's the consistent, which is when you are hit by attack, and this is also going to be very hard to hit this person, you can use your reaction to assume a defensive stance, allowing you to fend off incoming strikes, and you gain a +5 AC until, including against the triggering attack. Once you assume the stance, you can't do this again until you finish a long rest. So you get a physical melee version of the shield spell, and then you get a quick dash. So this is going to be incredibly difficult master to fight. But I love that. I really love that there's not to say these other schools aren't as impressive, but to become a master at this school or to earn this feat, there is a extra level of difficulty.
Yeah. I mean, this is pushing it into that thing, like if you can, eventually get this skill, like you become kind of like Zatoichi level crazy, like you become kind of superhero.
You are the definition of a folk hero in certain circumstances, right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
Like, you could walk into a town I almost like the idea of you being thrust into the situation.
Yeah.
Like, Jonathan's here. He'll take care of it. He's a sword master from
people will come and run and get you.
From Cain and Moon.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, not again.
Yeah.
There are other heroes in town. Please don't. I'm not the only one here.
Now, have we named these things? Like, I think of like something like Thunder Form of the Thunderblade, like this is like Form 11, like.
So we have them all as master cuts. So we have it named after the school. So Cain and Moon's master cut.
Cool.
Although I feel like we'll probably switch to strike in the final because these apply to other weapons.
Right. And they're also, the idea of gaining extra speed, that's more of a technique than it is like a cut.
Yeah.
And this was inspired by, talking with Tyler about the master cuts. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And, bringing that in here seems really cool. Now, here's the question. The way we're going to show this is, so there's Candon and Moon. There are two masters. They're not identical.
Yeah.
So we're going to create some nuance about these characters. And we can talk about that here. But in terms of how they're presented in the book, so you can challenge one of these masters, right? You don't have to fight them both at the same time or anything like that. You can choose Candon or Moon. So we have to decide how each one of these characters tends to approach these duels, right? And so, like, for example, not saying this is it, but just an example, like, let's say Candon kind of, is really, really good, but is also like has the nurturing spirit of a mentor, and so might not go full, bore on a student or something like that. Whereas like Moon doesn't mess around.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing. But you might not know that. You just, as a player, you're just like, or as a character, you're going to say, I challenged Candon. It's like, boy, you chose wisely, kind of thing. We could figure that out. Of just like, how do we want to present them? And is there a stat block for like this? Is there a Candon and Moon master stat block, or we do Candon has a stat block, Moon has a stat block? How do we want to present this? Because you're not fighting them to the death. You can, you can fight anything, but how do we want to present that?
I think we have to include some amount of stats, but maybe not a full fleshed character. You could do a really, really simple stat block that's like, takes up this much space, right? You need the ability scores, you need proficiency bonuses, and you need their AC, and then maybe the fact that they have access to this feat and a few other things. So you can make them really small, and not give them anything else beyond that. So this would be giving them a really, really buff commoner stat block, essentially, where they're not a fighter. They're not they don't have any assigned class abilities. We could do it that way, or we could just make a really, really strong character and stat them out. And even strong character in Obojima terms is probably like a level 8 style, a challenge rating. There's only so high, right? Characters in Obojima only get to a certain level. Then there's no gods here. There's no
Right, and the fact is,
Drits or Mordeganans.
You're not looking at them like they're dangerous to TPK, the party, which is how there's, monsters are balanced, right? And so that's not really the point of any of it. So we just have to figure out how we want to show it. Because if somebody does want to fight them, we do have to have some sort of like guidance for what that is, perhaps. But mostly it's like how do we give the information to the DM to run them, and do we want if there are two masters for each of these schools, there should be a reason there are two masters. So like the idea that they kind of have their own little nuances would be fun.
Feels like in the feat you would mention, like it was like there was one part of the feat that was sort of like dash up and strike, and then the other part of the feat was like sort of shield up, and it's like are all the feats kind of split into those two things where Candon teaches the forward strike and Moon teaches the shield? Like
not all of them, but I don't hate that split up for this teaching group. It could be interesting. It might make it easier in the sense that like depending on who you challenge, they only use their corresponding
specialty.
thing. So Moon only uses defense, or Moon only uses the aggressive combat, jumps into battle first, while Cain always uses defensive styles. And they both get their +5 movement or whatever it is.
It's a cool way to do it. It's an easy way to do it. We'd have to look at, the list of the rewards and see, or the feats, and see if there's a fun way for them to break down that way.
Yeah.
It's just cool. It's a logical way to think about it.
I know there's another feat that is a little more gruff and tough, and that one you can split up equally as well.
Cool.
It's not as stylish, and like one's defensive and one's swift and fierce. It's definitely more like one of them's going for the legs and the other one's going for your head. But it still works.
But that's the way it is. Like, you'll go to a martial arts school and you'll like, somebody's going to show you something that they do. Like somebody's like, they're really good with elbows, and if you want to learn how to do elbow strikes, you go to this person, and this other person's really good at like throws. Like they know how to throw you in combat, and so it just makes sense that way that, Juan Masters just got their trick. Like the thing that they do.
We live in Portland. Well, I live in Portland. So I know way too many people that practice HEMA, which is historical European martial arts, which just means they play with swords at like a really high level. Actually at a dangerous level. I know some pretty bad injuries from HEMA, which is pretty nuts too. But going there, like, I have buddies who kind of jump into these classes from different teachers all across, the state. And every time they go, it's like there's almost always that teacher hyper fixated on a specific thing, like locking or pushing or keeping your distance or poles, or it's never like we practice the ground, like the basics for everything. It's always like, screw the basics. I'm going to show you how to throw a lance at 50 yards. And because it's fun. Which also kind of builds up into if they all have a really unique stance, it also kind of builds up into the potential conflict that these teachers might have with each other, where they all think sword practice or sword play is done in a specific way. And, the two teachers always have like this symbiotic system where it's like defensive and agile, but then
it doesn't mean they get along though.
It doesn't mean they get along.
Which I love that kind of stuff.
And also doesn't mean all the schools get along.
That's right. Oh yeah, totally.
There's like, there could be rivalries between one school over in Shiratashi and the other school over. And
I really do think that making the school in the Blackwater Wetlands, which is a little more rough and tough, I think having them be aggressive and think less of the other schools is like the perfect thing to do, because again, to paint the picture of the island here, Kanan Moon is in Yanaman, which is in the Gift of Shiratashi. I'm saying so many words. If you don't know any of these, I'm just realizing I'm talking about the world. It's very in my head now, but you might not be. Kanan Moon is in the safe side of Obojima in the Gift of Shiratashi, which is the western coastline. And Yanaman is the biggest city, which doesn't get like attacked. Like it's not like in a dangerous area. And so like Boulder and Toroff, who are in the Blackwater Wetlands, have to deal with creatures and monsters and dangerous things
corruption
on a pretty consistent level. And so they would probably look down on Kanan and Moon, because it's like, well, what combat do you actually have? Yeah, you fight with children all day. This 12-year-old kid goes out and fights a howler for his practice every morning. When's the last time you fought a howler? And that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a little bit like scuba divers and like here in cold water. It's like really tough, like you've got to deal with current, you've got to deal with cold water, and you've got all this gear on. And then you go to like the tropics, where it's like, I'm scuba diving in my shorts and I've got like maybe 10, 15 pounds on, and that's like no problem. And so there's this like sort of like, that's not, they're not tough. It's like they're just in a bathtub with their rubber ducks. It's like, but you
can't be a scuba diver. You're enjoying yourself.
Yeah. Right how
now.
Dare you?
You have to be miserable when you're scuba diving.
How dare you be like, and it's weird. It's just, I guess it's human nature just to like, like get all uppity and puffed up about stuff. And it's like, big deal. But anyway.
So, and because I'm noticing where we're at, we can jump back into Kanan Moon. Is there anyone that you want to talk about in Kanan Moon specifically? I feel like I like the idea. I guess let's talk about the two masters first before we jump away. Let's talk about like their personalities, and
I'd also like to get in, like talk about the school itself if we can. Like, what's cool about this place?
Honestly, at the rate that we're going though, this might need to be a 2 episode. This might be our last episode that we were missing, because I think we could just talk about Kid and Moon all episode if we wanted to.
Yeah, this is great.
All right, let's see. Let's keep on going. So Yatterman, we were just talking about Yatterman. We had an off podcast talk about this because we had a podcast talk about it, and then that was a while ago, and then we jumped back into it, and we're like, we need to keep on talking about it because we decided that it is double the size in the book than most other locations, as in the sense that like we are going to write twice the amount of words and add twice the amount of art in this section than other sections. So we just felt that we needed to keep on talking about it. But very recently we came to some conclusions about Yatterman, and this school is there. Well, what does that mean? We know that they defend Yatterman along with the other factions, like, you know, they come to defend it if it were necessary, but that doesn't happen very often. Obviously, a lot of people travel to Yatterman to train at this school. That's part of it. There's a lot of factions in Yatterman. But what does that mean for the building? It's probably in an old first age building, like a warehouse or a something.
Right. Is it a rooftop, kind of thing where they practice? Is it, trying to think of like what's a cool dramatic location where you want to learn swords, right? In a cityscape.
Yeah.
Is it an old library?
Yeah. Is it a park? Is it like outdoors?
Mm.
I mean, if it's a nice, it's not raining all the time. Or
is it a sandwich shop?
Sandwich shop. Yeah.
Actually, I mean, they're not to say we need to make it a joke, but there is, we can play around with any building from the 80s, any modern day thing. So what makes this space is it in an old subway station?
Yeah.
Is it
school gymnasium?
School gymnasium. It could be in an old school, like an old like a European. I'm thinking of like a boarding school in Europe or something like that, where there's like, people stay in the school, they live in the school, they go and practice.
It's actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like if it's like a one of those sort of like closed off courtyards, like the school surrounds it, but then there's this courtyard in the center, and that's where the training ground is.
Or is it multiple buildings? Is it like there is like a grounds where training occur, and that's where like the masters live, and then there's individual like apartment complexes where it's like this entire apartment complex is all apprentices of the sword school or something like that.
I mean, that's a world building question then, right? Like how many students would they have at any given time? Like in my head initially it was just like, there's probably like a dozen or so students. But the idea of this being the biggest school on the island, obviously the island's not enormous, but it's a big island though. But how many people would be interested in this? Like, is it common? Like if you were to just meet somebody in another town and there's like, I trained at Candid and Moon. I never got my master, certification or whatever it is.
I got a bachelor's.
Or just like, I trained there. I spent my summer there or whatever. Is that the kind of thing it is? Like, how common is it for somebody to train here?
Go ahead, Adam.
Oh, I was just thinking, like, imagine like you've got your schools that are in the western part, and they're just sort of like, they're not really they're not fighting monsters like you mentioned earlier. Like, and then, so is it that the Western schools are kind of more moving into like, take for like the samurai, like they weren't just fighters. They learned, they learned flower arranging and poetry and calligraphy and all these other things, because it was like, there was a philosophy around it. There was like, sort of like, this is the martial art, but then outside of that, there's also this sort of way of living in the world as a warrior, and you're bringing excellence to all these different things, and they all kind of apply in some way to this philosophy or this understanding and like that. And then the ones to the east are more like, they're like, hey, we're fighting howlers. We don't have time for arranging flowers and calligraphy. We're about, dealing death, and that's
cracking skulls.
And so they're more like the martial aspect of it. And so you could kind of have like, people are coming there to learn swords and stuff, and they're becoming very, good fighters, but then they're also learning all this other stuff around it that, I don't know.
So I definitely built in like a charitable, like I wrote in a little charitable section in there, which I think is probably a majority of what, like if they're coming to, especially in Caden and Moon, if they're coming to the school and they're going to stay there for several years, then they certainly are going to participate in like the charitable acts that the school wants to participate in. And I don't know if it's like tied to a, you know, like a way of life or like but like perhaps the pretty, you know, the views of the masters. And so it's like, because the masters are kind of the head of the school, depending on how they feel about the world, that will direct something explosive just happened nearby. Is that will direct the direction that they take their pupils in. Because I don't really see this as being like at least in my opinion, I don't see this as being like a way of life or I think it's, you know, for a lot of people, there's probably people that young folks who grew up and like, I'm the best sword master or sword person in my school, and I got a ticket and I came in, I turned my token in, and then they trained for a year and a half and left and never got the feat, and they got what they could from it, but it was too hard for them and they couldn't make it in.
Yeah, it could be that, you know, there's a part of the school that is just, you know, how to be a good human, or how to be a good citizen of the city, or how to help your neighbors and all that. And they're kind of teaching that sort of philosophy. But then for the people who show aptitude or the desire, then it's like, okay, now we're gonna, you know, maybe they don't want to like reveal these deadly secrets. Like, it's like only people who kind of show this aptitude or this desire to be a good person, and then they're like, okay, now you're worthy enough to show something that's really lethal. Like, we're not just going to show it to any Yahoo that shows up and like, oh, here's a deadly art, and now go, you know, like, oh, I hope you're a good person.
Yeah.
Like,
and maybe that's for the people that show up without a token. Maybe it's like, you know, if you show up with a token, there's an understanding that you have a mastery of your weapon in some capacity. Like, you understand how to be careful with your blade and also utilize it. But if you show up and you're like, I want to learn how to, you know, they're like, okay, well, you have to take 6 years of, you know, customer service before you get in. You have to go help like the locals. You know, you have to show us that you are, you know, worthy of being taught this thing, because it's dangerous and scary.
I mean, to me, it comes down to, what do you want this experience to be in the game? Right. So if I'm playing D&D and I'm playing a fighter or somebody who has a sword, and like, this sounds awesome. You know, the first time I encounter one of these champions and we have this friendly duel and they present me with this token, that might be the first time I even hear about these sword schools in the game.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is an awesome world to be a part of.
Yeah.
And so, cool, I'm going to go explore that. So bearing in mind that I also have a group of other players who are probably going to support me on this, but you know, what is the thing that we can do to make this something that players want to pursue? Because it's a rich part of the world, but it's also, you get an awesome feat. It's just a fun thing to do that won't kind of
bog down gameplay,
or hijack the whole game and make it about that person, right? So like, that's kind of the thing, you know, to think about. Like, I love the idea that these sword schools are active in the world, and that they have, you know, either charitable things or they're doing service and teaching this idea of like, of what it is to be a good person, to show that you actually are responsible enough to bear the secrets of the school, right? Like, and you're an ambassador of the school when you're out there, right? So that's really cool. So how do we do that? So you get both of those things. So that also, because there's going to be a certain sense that when let's say I'm able to beat Candon or Moon in one of these duels, and then I go out, I almost feel like I will feel a sense of pride in the school itself too. You know, I'm going to go out and do that. So like, there is this certain thing of just like, I'm kind of advocating for the school as well. You might be a champion, somebody might duel you, and you'll have a token that you can give them. What a cool thing to like, to develop that in the game. But in terms of like how we're using this in the game, what is the experience we want? If somebody says, okay, I'm going to Yaraman, we're going to be in the city for a while, I'm going to go spend time here. Yeah. And then what are they doing?
And like, as a DM, usually I'll take the downtime, and then sort of like, I remember one time, I forget, it was like there was something where your character got training, and I would talk to the player, you know, because it was my friend, you know, and it would be like, we'd have our session, and then at the end they would be like, they'd go back to town and they would all chill. And then I would talk to my buddy on the phone and be like, all right, now your character's doing this training, right? And they're like, yeah. And then we talk about that off the side. And then when we came back to our session and everybody gathered around the table, I would kind of recap and say, oh, and by the way, while you guys were out there and you were selling your wares and in the taverns and having fun, Zortar, the saber wielder, he was like training and getting, and then they're checking out his character sheet. They're like, oh my gosh, like, whoa, you trained up? And they're like, we want to join your thing. He's like, oh, well, you got to be cool to do that. So like, but that was,
can't be lame.
Yeah, you can't be lame. Like what you silly people. But anyway, like, so that was one way to handle it. But I don't know if, that's just a way to do it.
So the reason that I wanted to include the acts of charity and the kind of level of like, this could take a day, this could take a year, is it's a way for you to go train like the teachings of the sword school outside of the sword school. So it's like, okay, here's the thing. Like if you show up and you're like, I want to train under you, and maybe there's like a week of you training and you kind of discuss it, a couple weeks of you training, you spend time in Yadaman, and maybe there's like a time jump or something like that. And then you can hand the player, you can say like, here is a task. They've requested that you accomplish this, on behalf of the sword school. But there's no like binding you there. It's not like a standard school where you have to sit and be in class every day. You're expected to train, and you can kind of join these classes. It's kind of like college professors where they're like, you're paying for this. Like you can show up to class if you want to. I'm not going to check for attendance. Yeah. So you can kind of join in and out, and as long as you're recognized at the school, you can join for any class that you want. But I would imagine that like at any given time there's 50 students at the school. There might be 150 who are out in the world doing things that haven't gotten, their master or their certification or whatever it is. And they may never
call that when you finish. What is that called?
I think gaining mastery, like gaining mastery within the school, or becoming I guess we could give it a title if we wanted to.
In judo, they call it a dan. You get first dan, second dan. Yeah. So you could call it anything.
Yeah, I don't know. We can jump on that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So if you go from like getting mastery is kind of neat, because then you get the whole idea of like, you go from one school to the next. So you're a master, and then you're a twofold master. Like by the end, fourfold master is like a big deal.
Yeah.
Like,
that's sweet.
Yeah, I like that.
That'd be what I do if I'm playing Obojima. Like I'm just gonna
go get all the masteries.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Imagine using all those feats in like one combat. And
my gosh,
it'd be a lot. So there'd be a lot going on.
I'm seeing the animation in my head.
Yeah. I'm seeing like these, the anime like where you're like moving and just like there's this like trailer behind you, like energy vibe, and
it's good stuff. I mean, I like it. I think it's hard to say like go role play them in class the entire time. I keep on looking in the camera. That's not going to be super fun.
Nope.
So you, as a DM, you're going to have to find a way for integrate them in the school, have moments where the school can call on them, or like I think
that you have interactions with one or both of the masters at different times. Periodically,
giving them like a longer task that isn't like a hard deadline or something like that. Like don't derail the story arc just so everyone focuses on that. Have something that when it is reintroduced at a later date, they can jump on it and really be excited about it.
I mean, is there something like in the location section that we have, there are adventure hooks. Is there a thing like for each of these schools, is there some like adventure hook thing that we could use and just say, hey, like here's a thing that Candid and Moon will send you on, and if you do that, you gain some kind of like thing, or like if you accomplish this thing and you bring it back to the school, like you get some kind of bonus.
I think not only is it like here are the adventure hooks. I think each level of adventure hook could be, because the system that we've built in mechanically is you go on adventure, or you train there, and for every week of training you take their AC down by 1. You could say you're not training here, so you're not participating in the classes. but when you accomplish this thing, there's no physical item, but the AC is now reduced by 5.
Like if you defeat a monster, or if you...
It counts as 4 weeks or whatever.
Yeah, it counts as 4 weeks. So, you could go and do this thing, come back, and there is this non-physical reward, which comes in the reduction of the AC of the master.
Yeah.
Which you wouldn't know as a player, but as the DM, you're like, okay, well, this just, you went and accomplished this huge task.
Yeah.
And now their AC is 22 instead of 31, which is a lot.
If you like roll a 20 on an agility, check, it's like that does something. Like you've shown that you like achieved a certain level of skill or prowess, like doing something cool.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, when you adventure, you're gaining understanding of like how this sword system works. And so, or like if you succeed 2 dex checks, you get X,
Yeah.
So stuff like that.
I like the idea too of them being like, you need to go do this thing while you're away from the school. Every morning you need to do 15 Nakudama hops. Then you have to do 6 sheep dragon crawls. And then you have to do, 25 Dara rolls or something like that. And you're like, okay.
Yeah.
And every morning fighters like up doing their leaps.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're a Nakadama, you're just like, this is easy.
Yeah, exactly.
I do Nakadama hops all the time. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. I don't know. We'll definitely need to flesh out the role playing aspect is good. There has to be a balance. There should probably just be a section on how to balance sword school training without overwhelming your story and forcing players to jump into that.
I think, the combination of having each school has a little checklist of like some fun things you can do. And it's not complicated. It's pretty easy. But the idea is narratively extrapolating from that. Like if you succeed at a dex check or you roll a 20 on an agility score, like that's it.
Yeah.
That you jump through that hoop. Then when you go back to a test, you have a bonus. So that's it. And each one, because as we're going, we've only got to Camden to Moon. There's a bunch of others. But as we go through these, like, then we start to build out the flavor of whatever these are. These ones are teaching you sort of like, you're using your body in a different way. Like, or one cool. is, you're using martial strikes plus your sword. Or the other one is like you're using deception and to like make your attacks better. So you could be like, if you succeed at a stealth check, then that's your bonus. So, but yeah,
there could be interesting, like they might give you a list to accomplish while you're out adventuring, where it's like, here are the 6 things you need to do. Swim up a waterfall.
Yeah.
Dig a hole 50 feet below and collect the soil from down there. And you're like, what? Like these really exerting, like not like go, kill a monster. Like here are these really challenging things. And then what the DM can do is when they go to accomplish that thing, throw in a fun, quirky adventure that goes along with it.
Yeah.
You go to climb the waterfall, but there's a spirit in there who just refuses to let you to get to the top.
Yeah.
Or you go to climb you go to dig a 20-foot hole or something like that in the middle of the Gale Fields, and howlers keep on bearing you in. Like they keep on shoving the dirt in or something. Like they're not fighting you, they're just bearing you.
They're laughing
running away.
as they're doing it.
Like by making these things, the DM can now insert the level of adventure they want to include there.
Could be like, turn yourself into a blueback salmon.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
Well, okay, that's an adventure right
Bring
there.
me back a rare ingredient.
Yeah.
Oof.
Talk to an elder spirit.
Yeah. Just like things to go, like, because like obviously all of these on paper might sound easy, but the DM can insert any challenge they want to.
That's cool.
Rather, and we can have regular adventure hooks too, but like, maybe each school has a list of things that they ask their students to go explore and accomplish. And it's all, it is all, based on faith. So like you come back and you're like, oh yeah, I went to the top of waterfall and then big.
But they'll know.
Yeah,
they'll
exactly.
know. Yeah,
know.
they know.
Yeah.
You just come back.
But the same type of person that might cast magic on themselves before going in for the thing also might try to, pull some trickery.
It could actually be really cool if these duels all take place within like a zone of truth. Right. So there's no like they'll ask the questions, so they'll ask like,
yeah, that's cool.
Are you free of magic kind of thing and all that kind of
well, here's the other thing. They don't accomplish those tasks out there, but the AC never drops. The AC only drops if they complete it. So they can come back and lie, but they've done nothing for themselves.
That's true. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's great.
You got to do your homework.
Yeah. Got to show the work.
You can't copy off of another student.
Now I want to see a party of all essentially fighters
going
that
to
are
train.
like basically it's this cohort that is going from school to school and all training
that is
together.
Really fun.
It is a fun adventure.
That's a comic book,
campaign.
man.
That is a comic book.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so there's so much to discuss with the sword schools. Clearly, we are going to have to do another episode. So hopefully you like this conversation because there's going to be more. I'm not ending the podcast episode just yet. I know you're turning it on. I'm just giving a little intermediate thing here. Before we have 14 minutes before we have to end this podcast episode.
Let's talk about Camden.
We have to talk about the guys, the people here, because they are there and they need to. So let's discuss. I think there's a few things we should discuss. The first one is, how are we envisioning these masters? Are they spirits? Are they humans? Are they elves? Are they female? Are they male? Are they non-binary? Are they Dara? Like, who are these two characters?
So just across the board, I think I saw all 8 of them as mortal, as people,
as human,
or human, or
Dara, Nakudama,
not spirit. I loved the idea of just like these are. It's I don't know. I think there's something about, I love how grounded it is by making them. But there's something really cool also, perhaps about a spirit. Maybe that says something about the philosophy of that particular school. So
it also could be that perhaps one of the, if there is a spirit, I think maybe perhaps the one that the school that teaches you how to make a weapon.
It's kind of cool.
Could kind of be cool. Yeah. Where it's like there's a, symbiotic nature, human, like physical being relationship with this kind of thing, which is kind of fun. Personally, I see the, oh my God, I just realized we have a piece of art, and I think it can be one of the sword school masters.
Oh.
We have this really, really grim, oh my God, we know we can make 2 of these as sword school masters. We have this really grim piece of artwork, which is like not Obojima at all. Like it is Obojima. It's super cool. It's actually one of our subclasses. But there's a like a drow style elf and a black knight and a person with 4 gold masks and a dagger.
Oh,
and
I think I remember that.
The dagger and the daggered wielding character and the knight can be the Boulder and Toroff from the
man. That was really early on.
Very early.
I'm looking for it.
There it is.
Yeah. If we wanted to, that could be them. We don't have to, but that is like compared to what I think Kanan and Moon will look like.
Yeah.
Which will be very, very like flowy and masterful and very light in their color scheme. This just screams, you Western weaklings. we hunt, howlers for breakfast.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have to do that, but we could if we wanted to. We'll come to that conclusion later.
One other note I wanted to say about like the history of the sword tradition on Obojima is we've talked about before about the Nakudama civilization. And I just love that the idea of the earliest I guess martial traditions come from the Nakudama. Like that's where it began.
It could be, I think, Caden and Moon, Boulder and Toroff, or Toroff and Boulder. What's the last one?
There's Lam and Salt.
Yeah.
And then there's Telu and Scale.
Right. So it could be that Telu and Scale or Lam and Salt, one of them could be Nakudama, or they both could be Nakudama, which is kind of interesting because if we have if we have 2 humans, a human and an elf, and then we have 2 Nakudama sword masters. Cool. Especially, I think, in the Gift of Shiratashi. Which one's in the Gift of Shiratashi?
It is Telu and Scale.
Scale might be an odd name for an amphibious frog.
So Candid and Moon.
Oh my!
Back to Candid and Moon.
Okay, yeah. Sorry.
Who are these people?
All right.
Who are these people?
Candid and Moon, I think they're human, maybe human and elf, and I would love for Moon to be either non-binary or like a lady, like female.
Mm-hmm.
Female sound. Yeah, that's a weird way of saying it. A woman.
Yeah.
And actually, I like an elf. I think that's kind of interesting and cool. We switched it away. Originally, when we made the Oka glyphs, I had them all as like moon and earth and all of these kind of like ethereal, type things. We switched them to, rage and
I mean, is that
forgiveness.
Is that like an argument to make them human, that all human, just because if you go with elf, then you've got to take into account all their Oka glyphs, possibly when you're fighting them, like for the touch. Does that make them?
But no magic.
Oh, okay. So the Oka glyphs aren't.
Yeah,
okay.
they allow you to cast the spells. And,
all right. Okay. Cool. Okay. That settles.
Okay, so do they get along? First of all, like, are they are they a harmonious pair of masters?
I mean, just my gut is like yes. I mean, Lum and Salt might be a little bit more. Yeah. Toraf and Boulder might be like they're like gym buddies. They're like, yeah, right on, Toraf.
I could see Toraf and Boulder too despising each other, and the way they teach classes by impromptu fights with each other when they have an argument.
They're just like older brother and younger brother.
When they spar, they're actually trying to kind of hurt each other.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, clear the room, and all the students like grab all the stuff and like, it's one giant beer hall or something,
or it starts off as a demonstration and they're just kind of one-upping each other until it just turns into a brawl.
And one of them gets thrown out of a window,
and the students are like, "Oh, here we go again."
I like that. I think Candid and Moon could be symbiotic. I don't hate that. But if they are symbiotic, then I wonder, do the two Nakudama? Does that mean the two Nakudama masters on the other side of, or I guess on the other section of the gift, do they hate each other?
I mean, we can come up with all sorts of nature of the relationship. It doesn't have to be like adversarial or not. Like, for example, Lum and Salt might also be a couple. Like they may, like that kind of a thing. So we can play with the nature of the relationship between, among all of them. And like Candid and Moon, they might have just the idea of mutual respect for each other. But then what is Candid like and what is Moon like, right? Like what is their deal? Is Candid old? Have they been doing this for a long time, or are they a new master? They replaced someone else.
Is it like the Dread Pirate Robins, where you take the old master's name? Like
there have been many Candons over the time.
I'm the third generation Moon.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think you've been living with these for the longest. Already.
So I mean, this is interesting. So I'm trying to remember what I wrote a while back. Is they were named for. Let me see if I can find it again. Each one was named for the master. So I think like whoever, if Candid were to go away and it became somebody else, the school would change its name. It would be so and so and so and so. Like they're the master. You're learning from them.
Interesting. So this might not even be the name of the school from originally 10 years ago, or not 10 years ago, 20 or 100 years ago.
And that might be a mark of, esteem, right? This is your wisdom that you are teaching to students. It's also your techniques.
It is also interesting too, because then it's like, I trained under the school under these masters. They might have I wonder, do they have a completely different V?
You've made a mockery of the school,
exactly.
Under your name. Yeah.
I mean, it might be that, there have been, let's say, other masters in Obojima, and maybe you encounter somebody who's like, I learned from, Grogor and Vox, and you're like, we've never heard of those. They're not in the book. But
who do you think taught Candon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's right. Yeah, they could be, spoken of in hushed tones or something. Like they, we heard when Grogor turned into a demon and
the demon master,
the fifth sword school that no one talks about anymore.
But what I like about that is also the idea. Like I like to think about characters also. Like what's kind of the retirement plan in terms of when I sunset the character. Like the character, okay, the story is told. Like I don't need to play every character to level 20 or whatever. It's like cool, this character story is told. Which means if I'm going around and doing the sword school, kind of this part of engaging in this part of the world, there's a good chance that like, I will say that I want my character to found a school. Or in the course of our adventure, let's say something happened to Candon.
Yeah.
It's like, it's going to be, I don't remember the saber wielder you came up with, but that person might become
That's really interesting.
Now it's that person.
Your character's name and now becomes like blank and Moon.
Like, cool, man. What do you do in that scenario when you're in the middle of an adventure and you get like a carrier brigade, like a full brigade of the postal knights arrive and they're like, hey, they want you.
Moon is summoning
you. Caden is passed.
Yeah.
We need you to take his place. That's really interesting. Because then it's like...
That's neat.
Because that that very well could just be like, and that character's out of the campaigon.
You make a choice. That's it. Yeah, that's
or it
fun.
could be like you're adventuring along and the courier brigade shows up and says like, Yadaman is under attack. And your masters, as a senior student, you've been summoned back. Like, and you're like, oh my gosh.
That's amazing.
That is cool.
That's fantastic.
Super fun.
Yeah. I don't know anything about Caden Moon, and the podcast episode's over.
Well, maybe that is the mystery of this world. I think, maybe it isn't like, maybe we don't know that much about them, and really it is just sort of like figuring out the flavor of each sort of school.
I feel like, based off of what we're going for, Caden and Moon feel like a very traditional, like I am the master, they're a student, they're probably fairly elegant, they're maybe even mythical in some people. Like there's a lot of legend about them, and when they train it's very elegant, right? Like you rarely see them pull a real weapon. They're almost always using fake weapons in their practices. When they practice, it's beautiful to watch. They might Moon might be incredibly gracious and kind and greets first year students and is like more down to earth and like communicates and maybe even participates in like the low level like charity, while Caden might like go and give speeches or will go and defeat a monster or something interesting. Like there's an exaggerated view of them that
larger
maybe
than life
figures. And then when it comes down to it, you can kind of build on those and make them very true, or you can do a little subvert expectations and maybe they're not as exciting as the legends say, but
like they're very like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon kind of vibe. Like they're like lots of Tai Chi kind of flowing robes, and when they pull their swords out there's like shing, it's like, and they like might be skipping around bamboo forests and stuff. Like there's that kind of thing, and they're scholarly in sort of the way they approach things and the way they kind of give off the information.
I think they're very calm, they're very collected, and they're very like well spoken compared to the next episode where we talk about the other, hopefully the rest of them.
See how far we can get.
There's 3 more.
This might be it. That's all these podcasts, 4 podcasts.
I don't know if everyone's going to enjoy. I guess I should turn. I don't know if everyone's going to enjoy 4 episodes about sword schools.
I will,
but we certainly will. And you can tune in next week to see if there's more sword schools, more schools of swords. Thank you so much for joining us. This was the Obojima Podcast. You can catch us on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, YouTube, and tell us what you think in the comments below if you liked that cool thing we did. I don't know if you guys saw it, but we put time lapse of art being illustrated in our last episode. Wasn't that cool? Also, if you're hearing this, that means we probably fixed the audio problem from the last 4 episodes, so that's cool too.
Yay.
If you're not hearing this, then it's only gotten worse.
That's all downhill from here.
Anyways, thank you so much for joining us, though. Follow us on social media, hop on the Discord, check out our playtest material and all that other stuff. And we will catch you next time.